Hey everyone, welcome back to the Withstand podcast. We are currently working our way through the balance of the book of Genesis, and we're up to chapter 31, which is quite lengthy. So I do believe we'll split that across a couple of episodes, and in today's episode we'll focus on Genesis verses 1 through to 32. And I pray that this episode is a blessing to you. And this is God's word. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has acquired all this wealth. And Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favourable toward him as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, Return to the land of your fathers, and to your family, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field, to his flock, and said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favourable towards me, as before. But the God of my father has been with me. And you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me, and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father, and given them to me. And it happened at that time, when the flocks conceived, that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and grey-spotted. Then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift your eyes now, and see all the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and grey-spotted. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, and where you made a vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, Is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not considered strangers by him? For he has sold us, and also completely consumed our money. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. Then Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. And he carried away all his livestock and all his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock which he had gained in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. And Jacob stole away unknown to Laban the Syrian, in that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. So he fled with all that he had. He arose and crossed the river, and headed toward the mountains of Gilead. And Laban was told on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled. Then he took his brethren with him, and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and said to him, Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. So Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What have you done that you have stolen away unknown to me, and carried away my daughters like captives, taken with the sword? Why did you flee away secretly, and steal away from me, and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. And now you have surely gone, because you greatly long for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, Because I was afraid. For I said, Perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. With whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours, and take it with you. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. This is the word of the Lord. So that took us right up until end of verse 32, guys. Now this is what Dr. Thomas Constable has to say about Jacob's flight from Haran. In this chapter, Jacob was motivated to return to Canaan due to Laban's hostility, Leah's and Rachel's encouragement, and Yahweh's direction. When Laban overtook Jacob in Gilead, Jacob not only defended his own actions of leaving with his share of the livestock without giving notice, but he also accused Laban of deceit. This silenced Laban and led him to request a peace treaty with Jacob. God had been faithful in blessing Jacob as he had promised Abraham and Isaac. Moses recorded the testimony to that fact in this section. Jacob acknowledged that God was responsible for his prosperity. God's goodness and his command to return to the promised land, as well as Laban's growing hostility, motivated Jacob to leave Padan Aram. And apologies, guys, if my pronunciation is way off. I'm so sorry about that. He goes on. The increasing antagonism of Laban's sons Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, encouraged Jacob to obey God's command to return to the promised land. The Lord also promised that he would be with Jacob. Verse 3 and 28 and chapter 28 verse 15 form bookends around the story of Jacob in Padan Aram, and they remind us that God had been watching over Jacob during his entire sojourn. Jacob then called Rachel and Leah and explained why he felt it necessary to leave Padan Aram and return to Canaan. He gave them several reasons. First, Laban's attitude toward Jacob had become hostile rather than friendly. Nevertheless, the God of his father, had been with Jacob. That is, he had protected him. Second, Laban had cheated Jacob and had changed his wages 10 times, in spite of the fact that Jacob had served Laban with all of his strength. Nevertheless, God had not allowed Laban to do Jacob harm. Jacob then explained how Laban had cheated him. Whatever wealth Abraham may have forfeited upon leaving the family unit of Terah in Haran comes to his heirs in the most unimaginable way. Third, the angel of God had spoken to Jacob in a dream, assuring him that he knew what Laban had done to him, and he had commanded Jacob to return to Canaan. It is unclear from what Jacob reported to his wives exactly when the angel of God appeared to him in the dream. This may have occurred before or at the same time as the revelation referred to earlier in this passage. It seems likely, however, that this was the same revelation as was God's second one to Jacob. In this revelation, Jacob learned that God had been responsible for his becoming richer. Jacob credited God with this and with his own survival. This is the first time in the narrative that Jacob emerges as a man of public faith. He finally takes the leadership in his home, and his wives for the first time follow his lead. The true character of Laban is clearly seen from the fact that his daughters entirely sided with Jacob against their own father. They too had experienced their father's selfishness and greed and were ready to approve of their husband's project and to go with him. Rachel and Leah shared the same feelings about Laban that Jacob had. Laban had treated them as badly as he had treated Jacob. Laban had evidently taken back some of the dowry that he had given Rachel and Leah when they married Jacob, so they encouraged Jacob to do whatever God had told him to do. This is another case of the Ruth effect, where the foreign wife commits herself and future to the God of her adopted family. Jacob then assembled all his possessions and left Padan Aram for Canaan. He did this secretly. Laban was busy shearing his flock and did not know that Jacob was leaving. Rachel's theft of her father's idols reflects the hurry and custom of keeping household gods. Nevertheless, the real significance of what she did, and perhaps the reason for the theft, lies in the fact that, according to the Nutsi tablets, he who possessed the household gods was the legitimate heir. One of the purposes of these idols was to obtain oracles. It may be that Rachel stole them to prevent Laban from using them to divine Jacob's route of escape. Evidently, Rachel wanted Jacob to remain Laban's heir, even though sons had been born to Laban after Jacob arrived in Haran, presumably. Other writers, however, dispute the significance of the household gods at this time, as well as Rachel's motivation. The supposed role of the teraphim, or household gods, as constituting the title deeds to inheritance, seems also to be fallacious. Rachel simply took them for her own protection and blessing. These gods were usually small figurines 2 or 3 inches long, sometimes carried on the body as charms, many of which archaeologists have discovered in Canaan. They may have represented departed ancestors or gods that their makers venerated. Rachel may also have hoped that these gods would make her a fruitful mother. Apparently, Laban's family worshipped false gods as well as the true God. It is curious that Rachel and not Leah should have almost always turned out to be Jacob's greatest hindrance in life. The writer identified Jacob's deception as such. That is, Jacob deceived Laban and tricked him when he fled from Paddan Aram. Perhaps Laban's nationality is mentioned in verses 20 and 24 because the Syrians, earlier called Arameans, were known from old as the trickiest people. Here, one of this people in a kind of just retribution meets one trickier than himself. God had promised to be with Jacob and to return him safely to Canaan. We see God doing this in spite of Laban's opposition in this section. It was only by divine prospering and protection that Jacob brought anything, even his life, back from exile. When Laban learned that Jacob and all that he possessed had departed, Laban pursued him. On the 7th day he caught up with him in the hill country, later called Gilead. But God appeared to Laban in a dream and told him not to do anything to Jacob, good, commending Jacob because after all Jacob had deceived Laban, or bad, condemning Jacob because Laban's treatment of Jacob had been unfair. Each of the three patriarchs had to be ingloriously extricated from some adventure. God revealed himself to people other than the patriarchs in those days. Many scholars believe that Job also lived in the patriarchal period. Despite this very stern divine warning, the following diatribe is one of the fiercest and longest in Genesis. First, Laban accused Jacob of deceiving him by stealing away secretly without giving Laban the opportunity to say goodbye to his daughters with a joyous celebration. Of course, Jacob had departed secretly for the reasons explained above. Second, Laban explained that the only reason he had not done Jacob harm was that God had restrained him. The behaviour of Laban is true to life, and every expression is familiar to my ear as household words. Laban says, "The God of your father spake unto me yesterday night, saying, Take thou heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad." Now we should think that Laban was uttering his own condemnation, and it appears strange that Jacob did not retort upon him by asking, "Why then have you followed me? You have disobeyed the command of God according to your own admission." Jacob, however, knew very well that such a plea would avail nothing. Laban believed that he fulfilled the intent of the divine command merely by refraining to injure Jacob, and so the latter understood it. The terms of the order were most comprehensive and stringent, but the real intention was to forbid violence, and this sort of construction must be applied to Oriental language in 1,000 cases, or we shall push simple narratives into absurdities and make men, and even the God of truth, contradict himself. Third, Laban accused Jacob of stealing his gods. Jacob explained he had departed secretly because he feared that Laban would take Rachel and Leah from him by force. He invited Laban to take anything that he found among his possessions that belonged to Laban. As for the gods that Laban claimed had been stolen, Jacob promised that if anyone in his household would be found with them, that person would die. Capital punishment for stealing was rarely imposed in the ancient Near East. This threat demonstrates how seriously Jacob took the matter. And I'll leave the link to those notes in the show notes rather. Thanks, guys. So given we learnt that God spoke to both Laban and Jacob about how much he would protect him from harm, today's daily devotion from Charles Stanley is called Handling Opposition, and it's based on 1 Samuel 18 verse 14, and it reads, "David continued to succeed in everything he did, for the Lord was with him." And Dr. Stanley writes, "After God gave David a great victory, something unexpected happened. King Saul turned against the young warrior. David's popularity unleashed a deadly strain of jealousy in Saul. Saul's envy was, of course, unfounded. Although David had been anointed as the next king and had popular support, he never did anything to undermine Saul. David simply lived such an exemplary and godly life that the nation was drawn to him, and Saul hated it. Perhaps you find yourself in a similar situation. God gives you a victory, and all of a sudden opposition rises up against you from an unexpected place. Do not think it strange or become discouraged. Instead, take David's quiet example to heart. Do not defend your rights or become resentful. Rather, behave wisely in all your ways. Maintain your confidence in God, fulfill your responsibilities, and respect those in authority, even if they are the ones attacking you. Why? Because then the underlying theme of David's life will become yours as well. The Lord was with him. God will fight for you just as he did for David. And he finishes in prayer. Jesus, thank you for defending me. Help me to trust you, to fulfill my responsibilities, and to respect those in authority so that you will be glorified. Amen. Guys, till next time, I pray for each and every one of you. And as always, I pray Maranatha. Take care.